Miss Elaine Carter looked at herself in the mirror one last time before heading out. Today was her first day at Westridge High School, and she wanted to make a good impression. She straightened her colorful scarf and took a deep breath. The nervousness in her stomach wouldn't go away. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. Miss Carter was 32 years old and had been teaching for 5 years at a small school in her hometown. This job at Westridge was a big step up. The school had a good reputation, and the pay was better. But it was in a different neighborhood, far from where she grew up. As she walked to her car, her left leg dragged slightly. The polio she had as a child had left her with a permanent limp. Most days she didn't think about it, but today it seemed more noticeable. She was already different enough as the only black teacher at the mostly white school. Her disability was one more thing that would make her stand out. The drive to school took 30 minutes. Miss Carter listened to her favorite songs to calm her nerves. When she pulled into the teacher's parking lot, she saw groups of students hanging around outside. Some looked at her car with curiosity as she parked. Principal Davis met her at the front door. He was a tall man with gray hair and a friendly smile. "Welcome to Westridge, Miss Carter. We're so happy to have you join our team," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Davis. I'm excited to get started," she replied with a smile. He walked her through the main hallway, pointing out important places like the cafeteria and library. Students moved aside as they passed, many staring at the new face. Some noticed her limping walk and whispered to each other. "Your classroom is right down here," Mr. Davis said, turning down another hallway. "Room 112. We gave you the senior English literature classes as you requested." Miss Carter's classroom was bright, with large windows along one wall. She had arrived early last week to set it up. Colorful posters of famous writers covered the walls, and inspiring quotes about reading and writing were displayed above the whiteboard. "The first bell rings in 20 minutes, Principal Davis said. Do you need anything else?" "I think I'm all set, thank you," she answered, placing her bag on the desk. After he left, Miss Carter organized her materials for the day. Her stomach was full of butterflies, but she was also excited. Teaching literature was her passion. She loved showing students how stories could open up new worlds. When the bell rang, students began to file in. They were louder than she expected, laughing and talking as they found their seats. Some looked at her with interest, others with indifference. A few boys in the back row barely seemed to notice her, busy with their phones until the last possible moment. "Good morning, everyone," Miss Carter said when the second bell rang. Her voice was clear and confident, hiding her nerves. "My name is Miss Carter, and I'll be your English literature teacher this year." A few students straightened up in their chairs. Others continued to whisper or look bored. "Before we go over the syllabus, I'd like us to get to know each other a bit," he continued. "Literature is about understanding human experiences, and we all bring different experiences to this classroom." As she moved from behind her desk, her limp became more obvious. She saw a boy in a Letterman jacket nudge his friend and smirk. A girl with straight blonde hair raised her eyebrows. Miss Carter pretended not to notice. She had dealt with these reactions before. Instead, she focused on the few students who were making eye contact, who seemed genuinely interested in what she had to say. "This is going to be a great year," she said with a warm smile. "We're going to explore amazing stories together." She didn't know then how difficult things would get, or how this classroom would change her life, and the lives of these students, forever. 3 weeks passed, and Miss Carter settled into a routine at Westridge High School. She woke up early, prepared her lessons, and drove to school with hope in her heart. She loved teaching literature and wanted her students to feel the same excitement she did when reading great stories. But things were not going as well as she had hoped. What started as curious looks had turned into something worse. It began with small things. When Miss Carter wrote on the whiteboard, her left arm didn't move as smoothly as her right. Some students in the back row, led by Tyler Johnson, the star quarterback with the Letterman jacket, started to imitate her. They would raise their hands with exaggerated stiff movements when she wasn't looking. Others would laugh quietly. Miss Carter noticed, but she tried to ignore it. "They're just teenagers," she told herself. "They'll stop if I don't react." But they didn't stop. Instead, things got worse. One Monday morning, Miss Carter arrived at her classroom to find a crude drawing on her desk. It showed a stick figure with one leg much shorter than the other, falling down. Her name was written below it. She quickly crumpled the paper and threw it away before any students could see it. Her hands were shaking. During class that day, she was teaching about Langston Hughes, one of her favorite poets. She spoke with passion about his work and his importance in American literature. Hughes wrote about the Black experience in America, she explained, moving slowly between the rows of desks. His poems show us what life was like. "Why do you talk like that?" interrupted Megan White, Tyler's girlfriend who sat in the front row. Her question wasn't asked kindly. Miss Carter paused. "Like what, Megan?" "You know," Megan said with a smirk, "some of your words sound funny." The classroom became very quiet. Miss Carter's childhood polio had affected her speech slightly. Most people didn't notice or were too polite to mention it. "I'm sorry if you find my speech difficult to understand," Ms. Carter said calmly. "If you ever need me to repeat something, please just ask." She continued the lesson, but her enthusiasm was gone. She could feel eyes on her, judging her every move and word. The next day, someone spilled water near the door of her classroom. When Miss Carter walked in, she slipped and nearly fell. Tyler and his friends laughed loudly. "Be careful, Miss Carter," Tyler said with fake concern. "Wouldn't want you to hurt your bad leg." Miss Carter's face burned with shame and anger, but she said nothing. Later, in the teacher's lounge, she sat alone. Other teachers chatted across the room, but none came to sit with her. She wondered if they had heard about the bullying. Did they think she couldn't control her classroom? That Friday, the worst incident happened. Miss Carter asked the class to hand in their homework. As papers passed from the back rows to the front, she noticed several students giggling. When she collected the stack from Megan's desk, she saw why. Mixed in with the homework assignments were more drawings, stick figures with exaggerated limps, falling down stairs, tripping over objects. Miss Carter stood frozen, the papers in her hands. The classroom was silent now, watching for her reaction. She placed the stack on her desk and looked at her students. Some looked guilty, others amused, a few uncomfortable. In the back row, a quiet girl named Amara looked down at her desk, clearly embarrassed by her classmates' behavior. "I know some of you think this is funny," Miss Carter said, her voice steady despite the hurt she felt. "But I want you to ask yourselves something. Is this who you want to be? People who make others feel small because they're different?" No one answered. She turned to write on the board, forcing herself to stand tall despite feeling like she might cry. "Open your books to page 94, she said. "Today we're reading about courage." As Miss Carter taught the lesson, she wondered how much longer she could endure this treatment. She had faced discrimination before, but never like this, never so personal and cruel. What she didn't know was that things would get much worse before they got better. The midterm presentations were a big part of the semester grade. Miss Carter had explained this on the first day of class, and she reminded students every week. Each student had to present on a different American author. They needed to talk about the author's life, important works, and why their writing mattered. Today was presentation day. Miss Carter tried to feel excited, but after 6 weeks of teaching at Westridge, her enthusiasm had faded. Every day brought new insults and mocking. She had started parking her car farther from school so students wouldn't see her struggling to walk across the parking lot. She ate lunch in her classroom instead of the teacher's lounge. Sometimes she cried on her drive home. Still, she put on a brave face as students filed into class that Wednesday morning. "Good morning, everyone," she said. "I'm looking forward to your presentations. Who would like to go first?" No one raised their hand. This wasn't surprising. Students rarely volunteered to go first. "All right, I'll choose then," Miss Carter said, looking at her list. "Dylan, why don't you start us off?" Dylan Adams sat in the middle of the classroom. He wasn't part of Tyler's popular group, but he often laughed at their jokes about Miss Carter. He slowly stood up, holding his note cards. "My presentation is about Ernest Hemingway," he said. But instead of walking normally to the front of the room, Dylan began limping in an exaggerated way. His left leg dragged behind him dramatically, much worse than Miss Carter's actual limp. The class went silent for a moment. Then Tyler snorted with laughter, and others joined in. Dylan reached the front of the room and turned to face the class. H. Hemingway was an famous writer, he said, now mocking Miss Carter's occasional stutter. The laughter grew louder. Some students were now bent over their desks, shoulders shaking with cruel laughter. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing to stop it. Miss Carter sat perfectly still at her desk. The classroom seemed to spin around her. In all her years of teaching, all her years of facing discrimination for being black, for having a disability, she had never been mocked so openly, so cruelly, by students she was trying to teach. "That's enough, Dylan," she finally said, her voice barely audible over the laughter. But Dylan didn't stop. He continued his imitation, now walking around the front of the classroom with exaggerated movements. "And H. Hemingway wrote about be brave men, something you all CC could learn about," he said, still using that mocking voice. Miss Carter stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. The laughter began to die down as students saw her face. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her expression was one of deep hurt rather than anger. "Class dismissed," she said quietly. "But Miss Carter, we still have 30 minutes," Megan began. "I said class dismissed," Miss Carter repeated, louder this time. "Everyone out. Now." The students looked at each other in confusion. This was not the reaction they had expected. They had thought she would get angry, or try to punish Dylan, or maybe even cry. Instead, she stood tall, her dignity intact despite their cruelty. Slowly, they gathered their things and left the room. Tyler high-fived Dylan as they walked out. Megan giggled with her friends, but a few students looked back with concern or shame on their faces. When the last student had left, Ms. Carter closed the door and finally let the tears come. She sat at her desk and covered her face with her hands. How could she come back tomorrow and face these students again? How could she continue teaching in a place where she was treated with such disrespect? She didn't hear the soft knock at first. When it came again, louder, she quickly wiped her eyes and called, "Come in." The door opened slowly, and Amara Jones, the quiet girl who sat in the back row, peeked in. "Miss Carter? Are you okay?" she asked softly. Miss Carter tried to smile. "I'm fine, Amara. Thank you for asking." Amara stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. "What Dylan did was really mean. Not everyone thinks it's funny. I don't." Miss Carter nodded, unable to speak for fear of crying again. "Your class is my favorite," Amara continued. "You make books interesting. Please don't give up on us." Before Miss Carter could respond, Amara turned and left quickly, as if embarrassed by her own kindness. Miss Carter sat alone in her classroom, wondering what to do next. Quitting would be easiest. But Amara's words echoed in her mind. Maybe there was still a way to reach these students, to change things. She just hadn't found it yet. The next morning, Miss Carter almost called in sick. She sat in her car in the school parking lot for 15 minutes, gathering her courage. The memory of yesterday's humiliation was still fresh in her mind, but she thought of Amara's words and forced herself to go inside. When she reached her classroom, she noticed a small folded paper that had been slipped under her door. She picked it up and unfolded it carefully. The note was written in neat handwriting. "Your class is the only one where I feel seen. Please don't give up on us. Amara." Miss Carter tucked the note into her pocket, feeling a small spark of hope. At least one student appreciated her efforts. The morning classes passed without incident. The students seemed subdued, perhaps surprised that she had returned. Dylan avoided eye contact. Even Tyler and Megan were quieter than usual. During lunch, Miss Carter was eating alone in her classroom as usual when there was a knock at her door. "Come in," she called. Vice Principal Rodriguez entered, his expression serious. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and gray at his temples. As the only Latino administrator at Westridge, he had always been polite to Miss Carter, but they hadn't spoken much. "Miss Carter, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Of course," she said, putting down her sandwich. Mr. Rodriguez closed the door and sat in one of the student desks across from her. "I heard about what happened yesterday," he said directly. Miss Carter's face grew warm with embarrassment. "News travels fast," she said quietly. "One of the students came to me. Not Amara," he added, seeing her surprise. "Someone else who was uncomfortable with how you were treated." Miss Carter nodded, unsure what to say. "I wanted to tell you something," Mr. Rodriguez continued. 15 years ago, I was the first Latino teacher at Oakfield High. The things students said to me, the way they mocked my accent. He shook his head at the memory. I almost quit teaching. What stopped you? Miss Carter asked. I realized that leaving would only prove them right, that I didn't belong. Instead, I decided to change how they saw me. He leaned forward. These kids have never had a black teacher before. Many have never known someone with a physical disability. They're acting out of ignorance, not just cruelty. That doesn't make it hurt less, Ms. Carter said. No, it doesn't, he agreed. And they should be punished for their behavior. Delan will be suspended, and I've called Tyler's and Megan's parents. But punishment alone won't change their hearts. Ms. Carter thought about this. What do you suggest? Mr. Rodriguez smiled slightly. I think you already have an idea. I saw your lesson plans for next month, the unit on empathy in literature. Yes, Ms. Carter said slowly. We're supposed to read novels about people facing difficulties. What if you moved that unit up? Made it more personal? Mr. Rodriguez suggested. For the first time in weeks, Ms. Carter felt a spark of excitement. An idea began to form in her mind, not just a lesson, but something that might actually change these students' perspectives. I would need your approval for some unusual activities, she said, her mind racing with possibilities. You have it, Mr. Rodriguez replied without hesitation. Just tell me what you need. They spent the next 30 minutes outlining her plan. When the bell rang signaling the end of lunch period, Miss Carter felt renewed energy and purpose. Thank you, she said as Mr. Rodriguez stood to leave. Most of the other teachers avoid me. They see what's happening but say nothing. Sometimes people are afraid to get involved, he said. But remember, Miss Carter, you're not alone here. As students began filing in for her afternoon class, Miss Carter straightened her papers with determination. The plan she and Mr. Rodriguez had created was bold and might fail completely, but it was worth trying. What she didn't realize was that this plan would not only change her students' lives, it would transform the entire school. And it all started with a simple idea: to make them walk in someone else's shoes. The next day, Miss Carter arrived at school early. She had spent most of the night preparing for this moment. Her classroom looked different now. The desks were arranged in a circle instead of rows. At the front of the room, a large cardboard box sat on her desk. As students filed in, they noticed the changes immediately. They whispered to each other, wondering what was happening. Tyler and his friends took their usual seats in the back, looking bored. Dylan had returned from his one-day suspension, head down and quiet. Good morning, everyone, Miss Carter said when the bell rang. Her voice was stronger than it had been in weeks. Today we're starting a new project. She walked to the front of the room, not hiding her limp. We were scheduled to begin our midterm projects next month, but I've decided to move them up. This project will replace your final exam, so it counts for 40% of your grade. This got everyone's attention. Even Tyler sat up straighter. The project is called Understanding Otherness. Ms. Carter continued. She wrote the words on the board. Each of you will research someone who faced great challenges in their life, but still achieved amazing things. Megan raised her hand. Like who? Like Frida Kahlo, who painted masterpieces despite terrible pain from a bus accident. Or Stephen Hawking, who changed science while unable to move most of his body. Or Stevie Wonder, who created beautiful music without being able to see. The students looked interested despite themselves. This didn't sound too difficult. But, Miss Carter said, moving toward the box on her desk, before you start your research, you're going to experience a little of what your person went through. She opened the box and began taking out items. Blindfolds, arm slings, earplugs, leg braces. For 2 weeks, each of you will spend part of your day living with a challenge similar to the person you're researching. The classroom erupted with noise. What? You can't make us do that. This is stupid. My parents won't allow this. Miss Carter let them complain for a minute, then raised her hand for silence. Mr. Rodriguez has approved this project, and your parents will receive emails explaining everything. You don't have to participate, but anyone who doesn't will need to write a 30-page paper instead. More groans filled the room. A 30-page paper was much worse. This isn't fair, Tyler said loudly. Why should we pretend to be disabled just for a grade? Miss Carter looked at him calmly. Is it fair to judge someone without understanding their experience? Is it fair to mock someone for something they can't control? Tyler's face turned red, but he didn't answer. Each of you will get an assignment today, Miss Carter continued. For example, Tyler, you'll be researching Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led America during World War II while using a wheelchair because of polio. She handed him a pair of leg braces from the box. You'll wear these during lunch periods and for 1 hour after school each day. Tyler stared at the braces in horror. Megan, you'll research Frida Kahlo. You'll wear this back brace during classes 3 days a week. One by one, Miss Carter assigned each student a historical figure and a corresponding challenge. Some would navigate the school in wheelchairs. Others would wear blindfolds during lunch or try to complete tasks with one arm in a sling. This is cruel, Megan muttered as she examined her back brace. Is it? Miss Carter asked quietly. Or is it cruel to make fun of someone for how they walk or talk? Amara, who had been assigned Helen Keller, raised her hand. How will we record our experiences? Good question, Miss Carter said. Each of you will keep a daily journal. Once a week, we'll have a sharing circle where you can talk about what you've learned. As the bell rang, students gathered their assignments with varying degrees of reluctance. Dylan, who had been given glasses that blurred his vision like Claude Monet's cataracts, approached Miss Carter's desk. Miss Carter, I'm sorry about what I did, he said quietly. It was mean. She nodded, accepting his apology, but not making it easy for him. Sometimes, Dylan, the best way to understand why something is wrong is to experience how it feels yourself. As her students left, Miss Carter felt nervous but hopeful. This project could backfire completely. The students might refuse to participate, or their parents might complain, but she had to try something different. Traditional discipline hadn't worked. Maybe empathy would. What she didn't know yet was that this project would do more than teach her students a lesson. It would start a movement that would transform Westridge High School forever. The first few days of the Understanding Otherness project were difficult. Students complained constantly. Some tried to cheat by removing their assigned devices when Ms. Carter wasn't looking. Parents called the school, questioning the unusual assignment. But Mr. Rodriguez stood firmly behind Ms. Carter. He even visited her classroom to show his support. This is innovative teaching, he told the students. Sometimes learning is uncomfortable. That's when it matters most. By the end of the first week, something began to change. During their first sharing circle, Ms. Carter saw small signs of progress. The cafeteria is impossible in a wheelchair, Tyler admitted grudgingly. I couldn't reach the food I wanted, and no one offered to help. I dropped my books 3 times trying to carry them with one hand, Megan added. People just walked around me while I struggled to pick them up. Ms. Carter nodded. And how did that make you feel? Angry, Tyler said. And, I don't know, invisible. Exactly, Ms. Carter said softly. Invisible. That's how many people with disabilities feel every day. As the second week began, the mood in Ms. Carter's classroom had shifted. Students arrived on time and listened more attentively. The mockery had stopped. Instead, they were genuinely engaged with their research. Tyler was having the most dramatic change. Navigating with leg braces similar to what Roosevelt had used was incredibly difficult. After falling in the hallway twice, he started reading more about Roosevelt's life. Did you know he hid his disability from the public? Tyler asked during class one day. There are hardly any photos showing him in a wheelchair. He didn't want people to think he was weak. Was he weak? Ms. Carter asked. Tyler shook his head. No way. He led America through the Great Depression and World War II. That takes serious strength. Ms. Carter smiled. Sometimes the strongest people are those who face the greatest challenges. In the middle of the second week, Ms. Carter decided it was time to share her own story. As students settled into their sharing circle, she took a deep breath. Today, I want to tell you about my experience, she said. The room grew quiet. This was the first time she had spoken about her disability directly. I was 6 years old when I got polio, she began. For those who don't know, polio is a disease that attacks the nerves in your spinal cord. It can cause paralysis. I was lucky. Only my left side was affected. The students listened intently. Even Tyler and his friends were paying attention. The doctors told my parents I might never walk again, but my mother refused to believe that. Every day after school, she helped me exercise my legs. It took 2 years before I could walk without support. Miss Carter paused, remembering those difficult days. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was how other children treated me. They called me names. They wouldn't pick me for teams. Some parents wouldn't let their children play with me, as if my condition was contagious. She looked around the room, meeting each student's eyes. But one teacher changed everything for me. Mrs. Williams, my fourth-grade teacher, made the class learn about famous people with disabilities. She showed us that being different didn't mean being less. She's the reason I became a teacher. The classroom was completely silent. Some students looked ashamed. Others seemed deep in thought. When I came to Westridge, I was excited to share my love of literature with you. I didn't expect to be mocked for something I can't change. Her voice was steady, not accusing but honest. Megan raised her hand. Her eyes were wet with tears. Miss Carter, I'm sorry, she said. I was horrible to you. I didn't think about how it would feel. Other students began to apologize too. Even Dylan, who had led the cruel imitation, couldn't meet her eyes as he mumbled. I was trying to be funny, but it wasn't funny at all. Ms. Carter nodded, accepting their apologies. The point of this project isn't to make you feel guilty, it's to help you understand. When we understand each other's struggles, we can be better people. As the bell rang, students gathered their things quietly. Something important had happened in that classroom. A barrier had been broken. The project wasn't over, but the real learning had already begun. The change that began in Ms. Carter's classroom soon spread throughout Westridge High School. When students from other classes saw Tyler in his leg braces or Megan in her back support, they asked questions. Ms. Carter's students eagerly explained their project, proud of what they were learning. By the third week, something remarkable had happened. The project that started as a punishment had turned into a movement. One morning, Miss Carter arrived at school to find Tyler and 5 other boys waiting by her classroom door. Miss Carter, we have an idea, Tyler said. He seemed different now, more thoughtful, less arrogant. We want to start an accessibility awareness club. Can you be our faculty advisor? Miss Carter was surprised. What would this club do? We'd identify problems around school for people with disabilities, Tyler explained. Like how there's no ramp at the side entrance, or how the buttons for the elevator are too high for someone in a wheelchair. We already talked to Principal Davis, added another boy. He says we can do it if you agree to help. Miss Carter felt a warm feeling spreading through her chest. This was more than she had ever hoped for. I'd be honored, she said. Later that week, local newspaper reporter visited the school. Someone had called the paper about the unique project happening at Westridge. The reporter interviewed Ms. Carter and several students, taking photos of them with their adaptive devices. When the article appeared on Sunday, the headline read, "Teacher turns bullying into life-changing lesson." The story described how Ms. Carter had faced discrimination but responded by creating an innovative teaching project. On Monday, Ms. Carter's phone rang constantly. Teachers from other schools wanted to know more about her project. A disability rights organization asked if she would speak at their next event. Principal Davis called her into his office. The superintendent is very impressed, he told her. He wants you to develop this into a district-wide curriculum, with extra pay, of course. Miss Carter was overwhelmed. This was just supposed to be a classroom project, she said. I never expected it to get so big. Principal Davis smiled. The best ideas often start small. You've created something special here, Miss Carter. But the most meaningful changes were happening with her students. Megan, who had once been one of the worst bullies, now sat with Amara at lunch. They were working together on a presentation about Frida Kahlo's art. Tyler had become passionate about making the school more accessible. He organized a fundraiser for the local rehabilitation center where Ms. Carter had spent years of her childhood. The basketball team and cheerleaders all participated, raising over $3,000 in one weekend. Even more touching were the private moments. A note slipped under her door from a student who had been especially cruel. You taught me more than literature. You've taught me how to be a better person. A quiet conversation after class with a shy girl. Miss Carter, I have dyslexia. I've always been embarrassed about it, but you've helped me feel brave enough to tell people. Miss Carter's favorite moment came during the final presentations. Each student shared what they had learned about their historical figure and their own experience with disability simulation. Dylan, who had once mocked her so cruelly, gave one of the most powerful presentations. He had researched Claude Monet and the cataracts that affected the artist's vision in his later years. I always thought Monet's water lily paintings were just pretty, Dylan said. But when I wore the glasses that blurred my vision like Monet's cataracts, I understood that his art wasn't despite his disability, it was transformed by it. The way he saw the world changed, and he created something new and beautiful from that change. He looked directly at Ms. Carter. Sometimes our biggest challenges lead to our greatest gifts. Thank you for showing us that, Ms. Carter. As the final bell rang and students filed out, Ms. Carter sat at her desk, overcome with emotion. The project had started as a way to stop bullying. It had become so much more, a ripple effect that was changing the entire school culture. What had begun with cruelty was transforming into compassion, one student at a time. 5 years passed since Ms. Carter's Understanding Otherness project changed Westridge High School. On a bright spring morning, she opened an elegant cream-colored envelope that had arrived in her mail. Inside was an invitation to a white coat ceremony at Lincoln Medical School. The name at the bottom made her smile, Amara Jones. Amara, her quiet defender from that difficult first year, was now beginning her journey to become a doctor. Specifically, a rehabilitation specialist who would work with patients recovering from physical disabilities. In her personal note, Amara had written, "You showed me how understanding others' struggles can change lives. I want to do the same." Miss Carter marked the date on her calendar immediately. Though she was now very busy as the assistant principal at Westridge, she wouldn't miss this for anything. The transformation of Westridge over those 5 years had been remarkable. The Accessibility Awareness Club that Tyler started was now one of the largest student organizations. The school had renovated all entrances to include ramps, lowered water fountains to wheelchair height, and created a sensory garden for students with autism. Ms. Carter's curriculum had indeed been adopted throughout the district. Every year, students in schools across the county participated in disability awareness activities. Teachers reported fewer incidents of bullying and greater empathy among students. But most meaningful to Ms. Carter were the individual changes in her former students. On the day of Amara's ceremony, Ms. Carter dressed carefully in a bright blue suit. Her hair, now with a few strands of gray, was styled elegantly. She still walked with a limp, but she no longer tried to hide it. Instead, she moved with confidence and pride. The ceremony was held in a large auditorium at the medical school. As Miss Carter found her seat, she looked around at the crowd of proud families. To her surprise, she recognized a familiar face a few rows ahead, Tyler Johnson. Tyler had changed from the arrogant bully she first knew. After high school, he had gone to college to study education. He now taught physical education at an elementary school, with special focus on including children with disabilities in sports. He had written to Ms. Carter several times, keeping her updated on his career. When he saw her, Tyler waved and walked over. "Ms. Carter, are you here for Amara too?" he asked, shaking her hand warmly. "Yes," she smiled. "I wouldn't miss it. What about you?" "Same," Tyler said. "A bunch of us from the old class try to stay in touch. Did you know Megan is in the psychology program at State University? She's studying how trauma affects learning." Before they could talk more, the ceremony began. 17 new medical students filed onto the stage, Amara among them. One by one, they received their white coats, symbolizing their entry into the medical profession. When Amara's name was called, Miss Carter felt tears in her eyes. She remembered the shy girl who had slipped a note under her door, the only student who had shown kindness during those terrible first weeks. After the ceremony, Amara found Miss Carter in the crowd. They hugged tightly. "I can't believe you came," Amara said, her white coat gleaming under the lights. "I wouldn't have missed it," Miss Carter replied. "I'm so proud of you." More of Miss Carter's former students joined them. Tyler, of course. Megan, now studying psychology. Dylan, who was working on a master's degree in art therapy. Each had taken the lessons from that classroom and turned them into a life of helping others. As they stood together taking photos, Miss Carter thought about how far they had all come. The students who had once mocked her were now young adults dedicated to making the world more understanding and accessible. "We should take Miss Carter to dinner," Tyler suggested, "to thank her properly." Over dinner at a nearby restaurant, they shared memories and updates on their lives. The conversation turned to that pivotal semester 5 years ago. You know, you could have given up on us, Megan said quietly. Most teachers would have. Miss Carter shook her head. Everyone deserves a second chance, and sometimes people just need to see the world through different eyes. As she looked around the table at these young people whose lives she had touched, Miss Carter felt a deep sense of satisfaction. What had begun as the most painful experience of her teaching career had transformed not just a classroom but an entire community. The cruelty and ignorance that she had faced had been turned into understanding and compassion. One teacher, one classroom, one simple idea had created a ripple effect that would continue long after she retired. And that, Miss Carter thought, was the greatest lesson of all.